The Imperial Citadel floated above the blue-white clouds of Asterion Prime like a city stolen from the dreams of gods. Thousands of vessels orbited around it in perfect formation. Diplomatic cruisers, military escorts, merchant envoys. Representatives from more than 200 star systems had gathered for one reason: the annual Royal Convergence. For most species, it was the single most important political event in the galaxy. For Ethan Carter, it was just another exhausting work assignment. The human logistics officer sat alone on a polished crystal bench outside one of the royal conference chambers. His dark uniform was considerably less impressive than the ceremonial attire worn by diplomats passing through the corridor. He wasn't a senator. He wasn't an ambassador. He wasn't even important enough to attend the meeting happening behind the massive golden doors. His job was simple: move supplies, deliver schedules, fix problems before important people noticed them. And right now, he was enjoying the only thing keeping him awake after 20 straight hours of work: coffee. Ethan lifted the steaming metal mug toward his lips. "Best invention humanity ever made," he muttered. The rich aroma drifted into the corridor. Several nearby guards immediately turned their heads. Not because of the smell itself, because it was unfamiliar. The guards belonged to the Varethi Royal Legion, towering reptilian warriors covered in silver ceremonial armor. One of them narrowed his golden eyes. "What is that substance?" Ethan glanced up. "Oh, coffee." The guard blinked. "Coffee? A drink?" The warrior's expression somehow became more confused. "You consume it voluntarily?" Ethan chuckled. "Every morning." The guard exchanged looks with his companions. That answer appeared to raise more questions than it answered. Ethan shrugged and took another sip. Alien cultures were full of strange habits. Maybe humans looked weird too. The corridor soon returned to silence. At least for a moment. Then the royal chamber doors opened. Every guard instantly straightened. Conversation stopped. Even passing diplomats moved aside. A figure emerged from the chamber surrounded by advisors. King Zalthor VII, ruler of the Varethi Empire, commander of thousands of worlds, one of the most powerful beings in known space. He stood nearly 8 feet tall. Black scales reflected the corridor lights like polished obsidian. His crown wasn't made of metal. It was grown from living crystal that curved around his skull like frozen lightning. The king appeared deep in thought as advisors followed behind him, discussing trade routes and military deployments. Then he stopped. His nostrils flared. Slowly, his head turned toward Ethan. Toward the coffee. The conversation behind him immediately died. Ethan noticed dozens of eyes suddenly focused on him. That couldn't be good. The king approached. One step. Then another. The corridor became so quiet Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. "Human," the king said. His voice was calm but carried enormous authority. "What is producing that aroma?" Ethan raised the mug. "Coffee, Your Majesty." The king's eyes remained fixed on it. "A beverage?" "Yes, sir." "May I inspect it?" Ethan hesitated. Technically nobody had ever asked to inspect his coffee before. Sure." The king took the mug. Several advisors looked alarmed. One even opened his mouth as if to object. But nobody interrupted their ruler. Zalthor examined the dark liquid carefully. The scent seemed to fascinate him. "Interesting." Ethan smiled awkwardly. "Most humans like it." "Why?" The question sounded genuinely serious. Ethan blinked. "Because it helps us wake up." Several nearby advisors exchanged confused glances. "Wake up." The phrase clearly meant something different to them. The king tilted the mug slightly. "What does it contain?" "Mostly water." The advisors relaxed. Then Ethan continued. "And caffeine." Every advisor froze. The king's eyes narrowed. "Caffeine." Ethan nodded. "Natural stimulant." Silence. Complete silence. The word seemed unfamiliar to everyone present. Finally one advisor spoke. "What is a stimulant?" Now it was Ethan's turn to stare. "A substance that increases alertness." The advisor looked horrified. "You intentionally consume neurological accelerants?" Ethan laughed. At least he started to. Nobody else did. Not a single alien appeared amused. A strange tension spread through the corridor. The king continued studying the mug. "What purpose does such acceleration serve?" Ethan scratched the back of his head. Honestly? Most of us just need it before work. The silence somehow became worse. The guards looked disturbed. The advisors looked concerned. One physician standing nearby suddenly stepped forward. Your Majesty, perhaps direct biological interaction would be unwise until proper analysis. Too late. The king raised the mug. And took a drink. A long drink. Ethan's eyes widened. Oh. The physician turned pale. The guards stiffened. Several advisors gasped. The king swallowed. Handed the mug back. Then frowned thoughtfully. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The royal physician looked seconds away from cardiac failure. Ethan glanced around. What? The physician pointed at the mug with a trembling claw. Human, what exactly is caffeine? Ethan opened his mouth. Then stopped. For the first time, he realized every alien in the corridor was staring at him with genuine fear, as if he had handed their ruler a cup of liquid death. Before Ethan could answer, King Zalthor suddenly froze. Completely. The corridor erupted into shock silence. For one impossible second, nobody moved. King Zalthor stood motionless in the center of the corridor, his obsidian scales reflecting the white palace lights. The coffee cup slipped slightly in Ethan's hand. What? He began. Then every alarm in the Imperial Citadel activated at once. A deafening metallic howl exploded through the corridor. Red emergency lights flashed across crystal walls. Security barriers slammed down over nearby entrances. The atmosphere transformed instantly from diplomatic ceremony to full-scale crisis. Poison Protocol Omega. The royal physician screamed the words. Panic erupted. Royal guards rushed toward the king. Others rushed toward Ethan. Before he could even react, 2 armored warriors grabbed his arms. Hey! Ethan stumbled backward. Wait! What happened? Nobody answered. Another guard snatched the coffee mug from his hand as if it contained antimatter. The physician was already scanning the king's body with multiple medical devices. Neural activity unstable. Cardiac fluctuations detected. Prepare emergency isolation. The king's advisors looked horrified. One elderly minister stared directly at Ethan. You gave it to him. Ethan blinked. He asked for it. The accusation barely seemed to register. Fear had completely taken over the corridor. For the first time since arriving in alien space, Ethan realized something genuinely terrifying. These people weren't pretending. They honestly believed their ruler had been poisoned. Meanwhile, King Zalthor remained frozen. Not unconscious. Not collapsed. Simply standing perfectly still. His golden eyes remained open. Yet he didn't speak. Didn't blink. Didn't move. The physician's instruments emitted increasingly frantic tones. Transport him to the Royal Medical Nexus immediately. A hover stretcher materialized. Guards surrounded the king while specialists carefully lifted him. As the royal procession rushed away, Ethan caught one final glimpse of Zalthor's face. The expression wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It looked almost confused. Then the king disappeared around the corner. The guards tightened their grip on Ethan. You're coming with us. Look, Ethan said quickly, it's coffee. Humans drink it every day. The nearest guard stared at him. Every day. The horror in the alien's eyes somehow deepened. The detention chamber was surprisingly elegant for a prison. Smooth silver walls. Soft lighting. No visible bars. No visible weapons. Yet Ethan knew escape wasn't an option. 3 armed guards stood outside the transparent energy barrier surrounding the room. His communicator had been confiscated. His coffee had been confiscated. Even his backpack had vanished. Ethan sat alone, trying to understand how a routine workday had become a diplomatic catastrophe. Hours seemed to crawl by. Finally, the door opened. 3 individuals entered. A scientist, a military officer, and the same physician who had treated the king. The physician looked exhausted. Human Ethan Carter. That's me. The scientist placed a small containment cylinder on the table. Inside was a sample of coffee. The liquid was now sealed behind multiple layers of transparent shielding. Ethan couldn't help staring. Okay, now you're making it look dangerous. Nobody smiled. The scientist activated a holographic display. Thousands of chemical symbols appeared. We analyzed the beverage. Great, Ethan replied. Then you know it's coffee. We know it contains caffeine. The room fell silent. Ethan nodded. Yes. The scientist looked disturbed, as well as numerous additional psychoactive compounds. Psychoactive sounds worse than it is. The military officer leaned forward. Worse. Ethan immediately regretted that choice of words. The scientist enlarged a molecular diagram. Our predictive biological models indicate this substance should cause catastrophic neural overstimulation in 93% of known intelligent species. Ethan stared. What? The scientist pointed at the molecule. Caffeine accelerates signal transmission. Yeah. It stimulates neurological activity. Correct. The scientist looked horrified. And humans consume this willingly. Ethan slowly nodded. The physician closed his eyes, as if hearing confirmation of humanity's insanity. The military officer spoke next. How much do humans typically ingest? Ethan thought for a moment. 1 or 2 cups. The scientist looked worried. Per cycle? Per morning. The scientist nearly dropped his tablet. The physician actually stumbled backward. Even the military officer looked shaken. Ethan suddenly felt like he'd confessed to drinking engine fuel. Is that bad? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, the scientist spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. A quantity that small should kill most species represented within this empire. Ethan's stomach dropped. For the first time, he understood the scale of the misunderstanding. To them, caffeine wasn't coffee. It was poison. An extraordinarily powerful one. The physician activated another display. Medical data flooded the room. The king's condition. Neural maps. Cardiac readings. Thousands of rapidly changing numbers. The dose His Majesty consumed should have been fatal. Ethan stared at the screen. Should have been. The physician hesitated. The scientist and officer exchanged uneasy looks. Nobody seemed willing to answer, which only made Ethan more nervous. Outside the detention chamber, alarms continued echoing through the palace. The entire citadel was operating under emergency conditions. News channels had already begun broadcasting reports. Rumors spread between worlds. Some claimed a human assassin had infiltrated the summit. Others claimed humanity had launched a biological attack. Fear moved faster than facts. And somewhere in the middle of it all sat Ethan Carter, a logistics officer who had simply wanted a cup of coffee. The physician suddenly received an incoming transmission. His face changed instantly. Shock. Confusion. Then disbelief. What is it? The military officer demanded. The physician stared at the display. Impossible. What happened? The scientist stepped closer. The physician swallowed hard. The king's vital signs. For the first time since entering the room, genuine uncertainty appeared in his eyes. He looked directly at Ethan, then back at the medical data, then back at Ethan again, as though reality itself had stopped making sense. The caffeine should be suppressing cardiac function. Nobody spoke. The physician's voice became quieter. Instead, he stared at the numbers flashing across the screen. His Majesty's heart rate is increasing. The room fell completely silent. The detention chamber felt smaller than before, not because its dimensions had changed, because the weight of an entire empire's fear now seemed to be pressing against its walls. Ethan sat alone at the metallic table, staring at his own reflection in the polished surface. Somewhere beyond the chamber, alarms still echoed through the imperial citadel. The king of the Varethi Empire had consumed coffee, and somehow that had turned into a galactic emergency. Ethan rubbed his face. This is insane. The transparent barrier opened. The same scientist returned. This time he wasn't alone. 3 additional researchers followed behind him. Each carried scanning equipment. Each looked at Ethan as though he was some dangerous animal. The lead scientist sat down. Human Ethan Carter. Good to see we are still doing this. The scientist ignored the comment. We have additional questions. Ethan sighed. I figured. One of the researchers activated a recorder. Another opened a holographic display. The third simply watched him. Studied him. Almost nervously. The lead scientist leaned forward. How long have you been consuming caffeine? Ethan blinked. Since college. The scientists exchanged glances. Define college. A place where humans learn advanced skills. The researcher typed rapidly. And they provide access to neuroactive compounds? Ethan groaned. It's coffee. The scientist's expression remained serious. Answer the question. Yes. The room became quiet. One researcher whispered something to another. Ethan caught only part of it. Trained from youth, chemical adaptation, intentional conditioning. Ethan nearly laughed. They were building an entire conspiracy theory around breakfast beverages. The scientist continued. How many humans consume caffeine? Billions. The stylus slipped from one researcher's hand. The room froze. Billions? He repeated. Yes. The scientist stared. You expect us to believe billions of humans voluntarily expose themselves to a substance capable of catastrophic neurological stimulation? Every day. Silence.
Pure silence.
The researchers looked genuinely disturbed. Not angry. Not suspicious. Terrified. As though Ethan had casually revealed humanity practiced ritual poison ingestion on a planetary scale. The lead scientist finally spoke. Either your species possesses unprecedented biological resistance. His eyes narrowed. Or you are lying. Ethan met his gaze. I'm not lying. For a moment neither spoke. Then the scientist deactivated the recorder. That surprised everyone, including Ethan. The scientist's voice softened slightly. Human. What? Are you aware of the punishment for assassinating a Varethi monarch? Ethan swallowed. No. The scientist stuttered him. You don't seem afraid. Ethan looked away. That wasn't entirely true. He was afraid. Terrified, actually. But panic wouldn't help. Panicking never helped. That lesson had been learned years ago. His thoughts drifted back to Earth. Back to a tiny apartment overlooking a rainy industrial district. Back to his mother sitting at a kitchen table. Back to endless bills. Endless overtime. Endless days wondering whether life would ever become something more than work and sleep. You should apply, his friend Marcus had told him. For what? The interstellar logistics program. Ethan had laughed at the time. Nobody from their neighborhood joined space expeditions. Those jobs went to scientists. Military officers. People with important degrees. Not warehouse coordinators. Not supply managers. Not ordinary workers. Yet Marcus had insisted. Aliens still need shipments. They have faster-than-light travel. They still need shipments. The memory brought a faint smile to Ethan's face. The scientist noticed. Why are you smiling? Ethan looked up. No reason. But there was a reason. He remembered the day he'd received acceptance. Remembered his mother's tears. Remembered seeing Earth's orbital elevators for the first time. Remembered promising himself he would see the stars. Not save them. Not change history. Just see them. The scientist interrupted his thoughts. What was your profession before entering interstellar service?
I'm logistics.
Military logistics? No. Scientific logistics? No. The scientist frowned. What exactly do you do? Ethan shrugged. I move cargo. The researchers stared. One actually checked his tablet again, as if convinced he had misunderstood. You transport supplies? Mostly. You are not a diplomat? No. A scientist? No. A military operative? No. The room grew strangely quiet. For days they had been treating Ethan like a mysterious human agent. Perhaps an assassin. Perhaps an intelligence operative. Perhaps a biological warfare specialist. Now they were discovering something almost unbelievable. He wasn't any of those things. He was ordinary. Painfully ordinary. A worker. A man who solved shipping problems and drank coffee during long shifts. The realization seemed to unsettle them even more. Because if an ordinary human could survive caffeine. What did that say about humanity? A sudden alarm interrupted the silence. Every researcher turned toward their wrist displays. The lead scientist's eyes widened.
No.
Another researcher gasped. That's impossible. Ethan stood. What happened? Nobody answered immediately. The scientists were reading data streams pouring in from the Royal Medical Nexus. Numbers. Charts. Neural scans. Live updates from the King's condition. The lead scientist slowly lowered his tablet. For the first time since Ethan had met him, the alien looked completely lost. What is it? Ethan asked again. The scientist stared at him, then at the medical report, then back at him. The king's neurological activity. Ethan's stomach tightened. What about it? The scientist swallowed. His voice barely rose above a whisper. It should be collapsing. The room remained frozen. Instead, the scientist looked down at the readings once more, as if hoping they would change. They didn't. When he spoke again, disbelief filled every word. His Majesty's brain activity has increased by 400%. The detention chamber fell silent. The Royal Medical Nexus had never seen anything like it. Neither had anyone else. Hundreds of physicians, neurologists, genetic specialists, and royal medical advisors crowded around holographic displays that filled the massive chamber with shifting blue light. At the center of it all lay King Zalthor. The ruler remained on an elevated medical platform surrounded by scanning arrays. Hours earlier, everyone had expected him to die. Now nobody knew what to expect. Run the diagnostics again. We already did. Run them again. The command came from the chief royal physician. His voice sounded strained, like a scientist arguing with reality itself. Another scan began. Energy pulses swept across the king's body. Every monitor updated simultaneously. The results remained unchanged, which somehow made them even more disturbing. One researcher slowly looked up. The readings are accurate. The physician stared. No. Yes. No. The younger researcher swallowed nervously. His Majesty's neural activity remains 412% above baseline. Silence spread through the chamber. No one celebrated. No one relaxed. Because nobody understood what they were seeing. The poison should have destroyed him. Instead, something impossible was happening. Meanwhile, across the Citadel, rumors multiplied faster than official reports. Government officials whispered behind sealed doors. Military commanders exchanged encrypted messages. Diplomatic representatives demanded explanations. The story had already spread beyond the station. An unknown human compound. A poisoned king. A miraculous survival. Entire star systems watched with growing fascination. And fear. Inside the detention facility, Ethan had stopped trying to understand anything. At this point, confusion had become normal. The energy barrier around his cell remained active. The guards outside remained tense. Yet their behavior had changed. Earlier, they had looked at him like a criminal. Now they looked at him like a puzzle. One guard finally broke the silence. What does coffee taste like? Ethan blinked. What? The guard immediately looked embarrassed, as if he had asked something inappropriate. The beverage. Ethan stared. After everything that had happened, that was the question? It's bitter. The guard frowned. You consume it despite bitterness? Most people add sugar. What is sugar? Ethan groaned. The guard looked genuinely curious. That curiosity worried Ethan more than hostility, because it suggested something had changed. The aliens were no longer simply afraid. Now they wanted answers. Back in the Royal Medical Nexus, the situation grew even stranger. The king's eyes suddenly opened. Several physicians jumped. One dropped a scanner. Another stumbled backward into a workstation. King Zalthor sat upright. Immediately. Without assistance. Without confusion. Without weakness. The room froze. The physician approached cautiously. Your Majesty? The king looked around. His golden eyes seemed brighter somehow. Sharper. Focused. What day is it? The physician blinked. The 4th day of the convergence. The king nodded. What time? The answer came instantly. The physician checked the display. The king was correct. Down to the second. A few nervous murmurs spread through the room. Zalthor stood. The physicians attempted to stop him. He ignored them. Your Majesty, please remain still. No. You require observation. No. The king stepped off the platform. His movements were smooth, precise, effortless. The physician stared in disbelief. For years, subtle muscular deterioration had affected the aging monarch. Nothing severe. Nothing public. But enough for medical staff to notice. Enough to concern them. That deterioration was gone. Completely. Another scan confirmed it. The damaged neural pathways had stabilized. Inflammation markers had vanished. Even old stress indicators had dropped. The physician's hands trembled. This wasn't survival. This was improvement. Within hours, emergency meetings consumed the royal government. Powerful nobles filled a circular chamber overlooking the stars. Arguments erupted almost immediately. It was planned. No evidence supports that. The human engineered this.
Impossible.
Nothing about this situation is possible. The debate intensified. Some believed humanity possessed advanced biochemical technologies. Others believed the incident was accidental. A few worried something even larger was happening. One elderly minister leaned forward. "We are asking the wrong question." The room quieted. He continued. "The human survives the compound." Heads nodded. "The king thrives after consuming it." More silence. The minister folded his hands. "So perhaps the question is not whether the substance is poison." The chamber listened. "Perhaps the question is what humanity truly knows about biology." The words lingered heavily in the room. Because nobody had an answer. Hours later, another complete medical examination was conducted. The results shocked everyone again. The king's reaction speed had increased. His memory recall had improved. His neural synchronization levels exceeded recorded norms. Even his mood indicators showed unusual elevation. One researcher whispered the thought everyone feared to say aloud. "It's making him stronger." Nobody argued. Because the data supported it. Every impossible number pointed toward the same conclusion. Coffee. A harmless beverage according to humans. A theoretical neurotoxin according to galactic science. And somehow, a performance enhancer for the king of the Varethi Empire. The chief physician stared at the reports. His entire understanding of medicine felt like it was collapsing. Then a communication request appeared on his display. The sender was the king himself. The physician opened it immediately. Zalthor's image appeared. Alert. Focused. Very much alive. The king spoke only one sentence. A sentence that instantly sent shockwaves through the palace. "Bring me the human." The physician swallowed. Because there was no hesitation in the king's voice.
No weakness. No uncertainty.
Only absolute determination. King Zalthor wanted to meet Ethan Carter immediately. Ethan was absolutely certain he was about to be executed. There was really no other explanation. 2 squads of Royal Legion guards arrived at his detention chamber. Not 1 squad. 2. Their silver armor gleamed beneath the station lights as the energy barrier around his cell deactivated. Nobody spoke. Nobody smiled. Nobody explained anything. That was never a good sign. Ethan stood slowly. "Should I be worried?" The nearest guard considered the question. "That depends." "On what?" The guard's golden eyes narrowed. "What coffee truly is." That answer somehow made Ethan more nervous. The group escorted him through corridors unlike any he had previously seen. The public areas of the citadel had been impressive. These sections were magnificent. Towering crystal columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings. Waterfalls flowed upward through anti-gravity fields. Massive windows revealed stars scattered across endless darkness. The architecture wasn't merely beautiful. It was designed to remind visitors that they stood inside the heart of an empire. And Ethan, a logistics officer from Earth, felt very small. As they approached enormous throne room doors, his stomach tightened. The guards stopped. The doors slowly opened. The throne chamber beyond was vast, large enough to fit a starship. Hundreds of nobles, advisors, military officers, and scientists filled observation platforms surrounding the central floor. Every eye immediately turned toward him. Ethan resisted the urge to turn around and leave. At the far end of the chamber sat King Zalthor. Alive. Healthy. Very healthy. Actually. The king looked better than he had during the summit. His scales appeared brighter. His posture straighter. His eyes sharper. The room remained silent as Ethan approached. The sound of his footsteps echoed across polished crystal. When he finally reached the center of the chamber, he stopped. Nobody had told him royal protocol. So he improvised. A small awkward nod. "Your Majesty." Several nobles looked offended. The king seemed amused. "Human Ethan Carter." "That's me." A few whispers spread through the audience. The king studied him for several seconds. Not as a ruler studying a criminal. more like a scientist examining an interesting discovery. Finally he spoke. What exactly is coffee? The entire chamber froze. Ethan blinked. That was the question. Not an accusation. Not an interrogation. Coffee. He cautiously answered. It's a drink. The king's expression remained unchanged. I am aware of that. A few nearby advisors sighed. The king continued. What is it made from? Ethan relaxed slightly. This was manageable. Coffee beans. The king frowned. What is a coffee bean? A seed. Silence. The king blinked. A seed. Yes. The king's advisors exchanged confused looks. One scientist immediately began recording notes. The king leaned forward. You are telling me the substance that nearly caused a galactic emergency originates from a plant? Basically. Murmurs swept across the chamber. The king held up a hand for silence. A plant. Yes. Not a laboratory. No. Not military research. No. A plant. Ethan nodded. The king's expression became increasingly difficult to read. It was the look of someone whose understanding of reality was under attack. The ruler of thousands of worlds slowly sat back. Explain. Ethan took a breath. Coffee grows on farms. The scientist nearly dropped his tablet. The king stared. Farms. Yes. The king pointed toward him. The substance capable of enhancing my neurological performance grows on farms. That's generally how agriculture works. Several nobles looked physically uncomfortable. One military commander whispered something that sounded suspiciously like a prayer. The king rubbed his temple. Then immediately paused. That movement seemed to surprise him. As if he had suddenly noticed something. A faint smile appeared. The headache is gone. The physicians exchanged nervous looks. The king hadn't mentioned headaches before. Interesting. Very interesting. The ruler focused on Ethan again. Continue. Ethan nodded. Farmers grow coffee plants. They harvest the beans. They dry them. They roast them. The king interrupted. Roast. Heat treatment. Why? Improves flavor. The silence that followed felt almost painful. The king stared. The nobles stared. The scientists stared. Ethan slowly realized he had accidentally wandered into territory that sounded completely insane from an alien perspective. You improve the flavor of neurological stimulants? Yes. The king's tail twitched. Why? Because we like good coffee. Several advisors buried their faces in their hands. The king looked genuinely fascinated. And this process is common? Very. Across your species? Very. The ruler sat quietly for several moments. Then asked another question. One somehow even stranger than the previous ones. Describe a typical morning. Ethan couldn't help laughing. A typical morning? Yes. The entire royal court leaned forward. Waiting. Listening. Studying. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. Well. I wake up. Several scientists immediately began recording. I take a shower. More notes. I get dressed. More notes. Then Ethan reached the important part. And then I make coffee. Every recording device in the room activated simultaneously. The king narrowed his eyes. Every morning? Usually. What happens if you do not? Ethan thought carefully. Most humans become grumpy. The chamber exploded into whispers. The king looked horrified. Your species experiences withdrawal symptoms? That's a dramatic way to say it. The king ignored the comment. You consume neurological stimulants before beginning work. Yes. The scientists typed furiously. The king continued. Without medical supervision. Correct. The king blinked. Several nobles looked genuinely disturbed. The physician who had treated the king slowly lowered his tablet. Humans do this voluntarily? Yes. Every day? Yes. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The scale of the revelation seemed difficult for them to process. Entire civilizations required physician approval for mild cognitive enhancers. Humans apparently drank theirs before breakfast. The king leaned forward again. His golden eyes fixed on Ethan. There was no fear in them now. Only curiosity. Deep curiosity. Perhaps even admiration. Then he asked the question that instantly silenced the throne room. Human Ethan Carter. Ethan nodded. Yes, Your Majesty? The king folded his hands. How many cups do you drink per day? The entire royal court waited for the answer. The throne room remained completely silent. Hundreds of eyes stayed fixed on Ethan Carter. Scientists, admirals, nobles, royal physicians, even King Zalthor himself, all waiting for the answer to a question Ethan considered completely normal. How many cups do you drink per day? Ethan thought for a moment. Usually 3. Silence. Then he added the worst possible detail. For if it's a busy day. Several scientists visibly recoiled. One advisor nearly fell from his seat. Across the chamber, a royal physician simply closed his eyes and lowered his head, as though mourning the loss of logic itself. King Zalthor blinked slowly. 4. Sometimes 5. The throne room erupted. Conversations exploded in every direction. No biological system should tolerate that.
Impossible.
The dosage alone. His species cannot be natural. The king raised one hand. Instant silence returned. Ethan suddenly felt guilty. Not because he had done anything wrong. Because he had accidentally traumatized an entire government. The king leaned forward. And this is considered normal? Pretty normal. What would be considered excessive? Ethan hesitated. Now he knew the answer might cause problems. Well. The room waited. I knew a guy in university who drank 8 cups a day. Absolute horror spread through the chamber. A scientist actually dropped his data tablet. The sound echoed through the room. Nobody picked it up. King Zalthor stared at Ethan. Did he survive? Ethan blinked. Of course. The king's tail stopped moving. The room became silent once more. For the first time since the incident began, fear entered the discussion. Not fear of coffee. Fear of humanity. Within hours, the Royal Scientific Council launched the largest biological review in recent imperial history. Thousands of databases were searched. Human medical records were analyzed. Trade reports were examined. Academic archives were opened. The deeper they looked, the worse it became. One researcher stood before a massive holographic display. The data has been verified. Around him sat dozens of specialists. What data? The researcher swallowed. Human tolerance thresholds. The room darkened as comparison charts appeared. Species after species filled the display. Safe biological limits. Neurological tolerances. Chemical resistance ranges. Then humanity appeared. The chart immediately became absurd. Several scientists stared in disbelief. One slowly removed his glasses. Another checked the calculations manually. A third requested verification from 3 independent systems. The numbers remained unchanged. Humans tolerated environmental extremes that would hospitalize most species. Humans survived gravity levels considered dangerous. Humans consumed substances classified as hazardous stimulants. Humans willingly engaged in activities carrying unacceptable injury probabilities. One physician stared at a report. They call this recreation? The image showed mountain climbing. Another researcher shook his head. It gets worse. A second file appeared. Extreme endurance races. Deep ocean diving.
Combat sport.
Emergency rescue operations. The room became increasingly uncomfortable. Every report painted the same picture. Humanity wasn't reckless. Humanity was adaptable. Disturbingly adaptable. Meanwhile, news of the king's recovery spread across the empire. At first, only fragments escaped. Then details emerged. The poison wasn't killing him. The poison was helping him. Soon another fact followed. Humans consumed the same substance daily. The public reaction was immediate. Planetary networks exploded with discussion. Commentators debated human biology. Scientists argued with each other on live broadcasts. Military analysts began publishing risk assessments. Some worlds viewed humans with fascination. Others viewed them with concern. A few viewed them with outright fear. One governor publicly demanded increased surveillance of all human trade routes. Another requested updated defense protocols. Not because humanity had threatened anyone. Because nobody knew what humanity might be capable of. Inside the Citadel, Ethan remained completely unaware of the panic spreading across dozens of star systems. He sat in a private guest suite rather than a prison cell now. Technically not under arrest. Technically not free either. The situation was complicated. A tray of food rested on a nearby table. Ethan stared at it, mostly because it looked alive. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The door opened. King Zalthor entered personally. Without guards. Without advisors. The gesture surprised Ethan. The king approached a large observation window overlooking space. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Zalthor broke the silence. Do humans fear many things? Ethan considered the question. Sure. What? The answer came naturally. Failure. The king turned. Ethan continued. Losing people. Making mistakes. Not having enough time. The king listened carefully. Those answers didn't sound like the responses of monsters. They sounded familiar. The ruler folded his arms. Yet your species willingly consumes compounds capable of killing most civilizations. Ethan laughed softly. The king looked confused. It's just coffee. The ruler stared out at the stars again. Perhaps that was the most disturbing part. Humans didn't view their resilience as extraordinary. To them it was ordinary. Normal. Everyday. The thought lingered with him long after the conversation ended. Far beyond imperial space, hidden within a classified intelligence facility, another conversation was taking place. A transmission arrived from a covert source inside the Varethi Empire. Encrypted. Verified.
Urgent.
An intelligence officer activated the report. His eyes narrowed as he read. Human. Poison. King survived. Enhanced neurological function. Potential biological superiority. The officer immediately stood. This goes to high command. Within minutes the information moved upward through military channels. Then political channels. Then directly into the hands of a rival civilization. A neighboring empire. An empire that had spent decades searching for weaknesses within Varethi territory. Now they had discovered something unexpected. Something potentially valuable. And potentially dangerous. As intelligence analysts gathered around the report, one question echoed through the room. What exactly were humans? The neighboring empire had just learned about the incident. The imperial citadel had become quieter. Not because the crisis was over. Because it was changing. The panic surrounding coffee had slowly transformed into something else. Questions. Research. Speculation. Fear of humanity still lingered across parts of the empire, but inside the palace another concern had begun taking priority. The king. Ethan noticed it during his next meeting with Zalthor. The ruler still appeared stronger than before. More alert. More energetic. Yet something felt wrong. Subtle. Easy to miss. A brief tremor in his hand. A momentary lapse in concentration. A flicker of pain hidden behind confident eyes. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Years of logistics work had taught Ethan to pay attention to small details. Problems often announce themselves quietly before becoming disasters. The king noticed Ethan watching. What? Ethan hesitated. Nothing. The answer wasn't convincing. Zalthor gave a faint smile. You are a poor liar, human. Ethan chuckled. You're hiding something. The king's expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. The smile disappeared. For a brief moment, Ethan saw exhaustion. Real exhaustion. Then the royal doors opened. The king's personal physician entered. The conversation ended immediately. That alone raised another question. Several hours later, Ethan received an unexpected summons. Not from the king. From the physician. The meeting location wasn't a throne room. Or a laboratory. Or even an official office. It was a small private observation chamber overlooking the stars. The room was empty except for the physician. The elderly alien stood near a transparent wall as distant suns burned across the darkness beyond. When Ethan entered, the physician locked the door. That instantly made him nervous. Okay. Ethan folded his arms. That's never a good sign. The physician didn't smile. Didn't respond. For several seconds he simply stared into space. Then he spoke. What I am about to tell you is classified above Imperial security clearance. Ethan blinked. Then maybe you shouldn't tell me. You need to know. The seriousness in his voice erased any humor. Ethan's stomach tightened. The physician activated a holographic display. Medical scans appeared. Thousands of them. Brain scans. Genetic records. Neurological mapping. Some of the images looked decades old. Others had been taken recently. At the center of every display appeared the same patient. King Zelthor. What am I looking at? The physician's voice became quiet. The truth. The images shifted. Highlighted regions appeared across the king's neural pathways. Damaged areas. Degenerating structures. Progressive deterioration. Ethan frowned. What is that? The physician closed his eyes. Then answered. A disease. The room suddenly felt colder. A serious one? The physician looked at him. The pain in those ancient eyes said everything before he even spoke. There is no cure. Silence. The stars beyond the observation window seemed infinitely distant. The king species suffers from a rare neurological degeneration. The physician continued. It progresses slowly, sometimes over decades, but eventually. His voice trailed off. Ethan already knew the answer. Eventually it kills. The physician nodded. As neural degradation advances, memory declines. Cognitive function weakens. Motor control deteriorates. The final stages are catastrophic. Ethan stared at the scans. The king's occasional fatigue. The headaches. The hidden symptoms. Suddenly everything made sense. How long has he known? The physician answered immediately. Years. The revelation hit hard. Because Ethan remembered every conversation with Zelthor. Every moment of confidence. Every display of strength. The king had carried that burden alone. Without complaint. Without self-pity. Leading an empire while secretly dying. The physician enlarged another scan. This was taken 3 weeks ago. The neural damage looked severe. Much worse than Ethan expected. Then another image appeared. A scan taken after the coffee incident. Ethan leaned forward. The difference was obvious. The damage had slowed. Not reversed. Not cured. But slowed. The physician's voice trembled. Do you understand now? Ethan swallowed. The coffee. The physician nodded. The coffee. For a moment neither spoke. The realization felt enormous. All the panic. All the fear. All the scientific confusion. They had been looking at the wrong problem. Coffee wasn't helping the king because it enhanced performance. It was helping because it was fighting something. Holding something back. A disease. The physician lowered his head. The effect should be impossible. But the evidence is undeniable. Ethan stared at the scans. How much time does he have? The physician remained silent. That silence lasted several painful seconds. Then he finally answered. Without intervention? His voice barely rose above a whisper. Months. The word hit harder than Ethan expected. Months. Not years. Not decades. Months. The ruler of thousands of worlds was running out of time. Later that evening, Ethan stood with Zelthor on a quiet balcony overlooking the citadel. Neither spoke for a while. The stars drifted silently beyond the station. Finally, the king broke the silence. He told you. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded. The king seemed unsurprised. For several moments he simply watched the stars. Then he spoke again. Most rulers spend their lives pretending to be invincible. His voice was calm. I no longer have the luxury. Ethan didn't know what to say. The king turned toward him. For the first time since they had met, there was no throne.
No ceremony.
No empire. Just one person asking another for help. Human. Ethan looked up. If your people know anything about this phenomenon. The king paused. Not from weakness. From pride. Pride that had finally reached its limit. I need your help. The words carried enormous weight. Because kings rarely asked. And this one never had. Ethan nodded slowly. We'll figure something out. The answer wasn't a promise. It was a decision. The same kind of decision ordinary humans made every day when faced with impossible problems. You keep trying. Because giving up isn't an option. For the first time in days, genuine hope appeared in the king's eyes. Then suddenly he staggered. The moment happened so fast Ethan almost missed it. 1 second the king stood normally. The next his hand slammed against the balcony railing. Pain flashed across his face. A nearby medical monitor instantly activated. Alarms began screaming. The king's neurological readings plummeted. The physician's emergency channel exploded with alerts. Ethan's heart sank, because the numbers on the display were changing rapidly. Whatever the coffee had been doing, it had stopped working. The alarms returned. Not the dramatic palace-wide sirens from the day of the coffee incident. These were worse. Quiet. Clinical. The kind of alarms that appeared when machines stopped being optimistic. Ethan ran beside the medical team as they rushed King Zalthor through the corridors of the Royal Medical Nexus. The ruler remained conscious, but barely. His movements had become slower. His breathing heavier. The confidence that had defined him only hours earlier was beginning to crack. Behind them, physicians shouted updates. Neural degradation accelerating. Stabilization effect collapsing. Motor response declining. The king's physician looked pale. How long? A researcher checked the projections. Nobody wanted to answer. Finally, someone spoke. We don't know. For the first time since arriving in the Empire, Ethan felt genuinely helpless. Coffee had worked. Everyone had seen it. The improvement was real. So why was it failing now? That question haunted him throughout the night. The next morning, Ethan walked into the largest scientific facility on the Citadel. Thousands of researchers filled the chamber. Holographic displays stretched from floor to ceiling. Biological models rotated in the air. Chemical formulas drifted between workstations. The brightest scientific minds in an empire were fighting a losing battle. And they were stuck. Ethan quickly noticed something. Every team was doing the same thing. Testing caffeine. Retesting caffeine. Modeling caffeine. Analyzing caffeine. Again. And again. And again. The entire effort revolved around a single assumption. Caffeine was the answer. Ethan stared at a display. Then another. Then another. The same pattern repeated everywhere. Finally, he approached a scientist. Can I ask something? The researcher looked exhausted. What? What if caffeine isn't the important part? The scientist frowned. What? Ethan pointed toward a molecular chart. You're assuming caffeine caused the effect. It did. Maybe. The scientist crossed his arms. The evidence is clear. Ethan shook his head. No. The scientist looked offended. Ethan continued. The evidence says coffee helped. A pause. The researcher blinked. Coffee. Not caffeine. For several seconds the alien simply stared. Then slowly looked back toward his data. The distinction seemed obvious now. Yet nobody had considered it. Because nobody outside humanity truly understood coffee. Hours later, an emergency scientific session was called. Dozens of researchers gathered around a central display. The king's physician stood at the front. Ethan stood beside him. Which felt ridiculous. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't even close. He moved cargo for a living. Yet somehow he had become part of the most important medical investigation in the Empire. The physician addressed the room. The human has raised an alternative hypothesis. Several researchers looked annoyed. Others looked curious. One looked openly insulted. The physician continued. We have focused exclusively on caffeine. A display appeared. The chemical structure rotated slowly. What if we are wrong? The room became silent. That question alone challenged weeks of work. Ethan stepped forward. Coffee isn't one thing. The researchers watched. It contains hundreds of compounds. Murmurs spread through the chamber. One scientist immediately began checking databases. Another opened chemical references. A third froze. Because Ethan was right. Coffee wasn't a single substance. It was a mixture. An incredibly complicated mixture. And nobody had tested most of it. The investigation changed immediately. New scans began. New simulations. New biological comparisons. Researchers worked without sleep. Without breaks. Without rest. Even human specialists joined the effort. For the first time, direct communication links were opened between Earth and the Imperial Citadel. Massive holographic screens filled with human faces. Doctors. Biochemists. Agricultural scientists. Neurologists. The aliens stared at them with fascination. The humans stared back with equal curiosity. An unusual alliance formed. Not between governments. Between people trying to solve a problem. The conversations became constant. What compounds remain after roasting? What environmental factors affect growth? Different coffee species exist? Wait, there are thousands of variations? Every answer created new questions. Every discovery opened another mystery. And for the first time since the crisis began, progress appeared possible. 3 days later, a breakthrough arrived. A young human biochemist from Earth appeared on one of the holographic screens. I think we found something. The room immediately fell silent. Researchers gathered around. The scientist highlighted several compounds. Not caffeine. Not even close. Compounds present only under specific growing conditions. Rare combinations. Tiny concentrations. The room listened carefully. The king's improvement doesn't correlate with caffeine levels. The display shifted. Graphs appeared. Patterns emerged. The data was undeniable. The neurological response matches interaction between multiple compounds. A Varethi researcher leaned forward. How many? At least 7. Shock spread through the room. 7. Not 1. 7 separate components interacting together. The physician looked stunned. So caffeine isn't the cure. The human scientist shook her head. No. Another display appeared. Complex molecular pathways lit up. The room watched in silence. One compound enhanced absorption. Another affected neural signaling. A third appeared to slow degeneration. Individually, they did almost nothing. Together, they produced the impossible effect. Ethan exhaled slowly. At last. An answer. Or at least part of one. Unfortunately, answers created new problems. The compounds were rare. Extremely rare. Some appeared only in specific coffee species. Others depended on soil conditions, temperature variations,
Atmosphérique composition.
even growing altitude. Researchers searched agricultural databases, planetary records, trade archives, every source they could access. The results were discouraging. Nobody knew exactly where the necessary combination existed. Not even Earth. The room slowly realized the truth. They knew what they were looking for, but not where to find it. The physician stared at the data. The solution exists. Nobody celebrated. Because existence wasn't enough. They still had to find it. And time was running out. As the meeting continued, a priority alert suddenly appeared. Every display turned red. The physician's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. He opened the report. The room became silent. Ethan's heart sank. Because he already knew the news wouldn't be good. The physician looked toward him. Then toward the king's latest scans. His voice sounded hollow. We are out of time. The room froze. The updated neurological projections filled the central display. Numbers dropped. Stability indexes collapsed. Degeneration rates surged. The king's condition wasn't merely worsening. It was accelerating. Rapidly. Dangerously. And despite everything they had discovered, King Zalthor's condition was deteriorating faster than ever. The emergency meeting had barely ended when another crisis struck. A military officer burst into the research chamber without waiting for permission. His armor was scorched from a recent hyperspace transit. His breathing was heavy. His eyes carried the unmistakable look of someone bringing terrible news. The room immediately fell silent. What happened? The chief physician demanded. The officer activated a holographic projection. A cluster of red symbols appeared across the edge of Imperial territory. Dozens. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Gasps spread through the room. Ethan didn't understand military strategy, but even he knew what those symbols represented. Warships. A lot of them. The Drakari Dominion, the officer said grimly. Several scientists immediately stiffened. The name alone seemed enough to darken the atmosphere. Ethan looked around. What is the Drakari Dominion? Nobody answered immediately. The officer finally spoke. The Empire's oldest enemy. The hologram expanded. Multiple fleet formations appeared. Supply routes. Carrier groups. Heavy assault vessels. The physician's expression worsened with every update. They are mobilizing. The officer nodded. No. He enlarged the display. They are already moving. The room froze. Hours later, the Imperial War Council assembled. The atmosphere felt completely different from previous meetings. Before, people had argued over coffee. Now they argued over survival. Military commanders filled the circular chamber. Nobles occupied elevated platforms. Security advisors stood behind sealed energy barriers. At the center sat King Zalthor. He looked tired. Very tired. The temporary improvement from the coffee was fading. Yet he still carried himself with royal dignity. The meeting began. The Dominion has crossed 3 border sectors. A fleet commander pointed at the display. They are testing our response times. Another officer disagreed. No. They are preparing invasion corridors. Arguments erupted immediately. Ethan sat quietly near the rear of the chamber. He wasn't supposed to be there. But the king had personally requested his presence. That decision was already creating problems. One noble stood abruptly. This situation proves our mistake. The room turned toward him. He pointed directly at Ethan. The human. Several voices murmured agreement. Ethan felt every eye in the room shift toward him. The noble continued. Our ruler consumed an unknown human substance. The empire entered chaos. Our enemies learned of our weakness. The timing cannot be ignored. The accusation hung heavily in the air. Another noble stood. I agree. The human brought this crisis. Ethan clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue. Wanted to defend himself. But the truth was complicated. The invasion wasn't his fault. Yet none of this would have happened without the coffee incident. A third noble joined the attack. We trusted an outsider. We exposed our vulnerabilities. We endangered the throne. The chamber grew louder. More voices joined. Fear was spreading. And frightened people always searched for someone to blame. Ethan had become the easiest target. King Zalthor listened quietly. Perhaps too quietly. The nobles interpreted his silence as weakness. That was a mistake. Finally the king raised one hand. The room immediately fell silent. His golden eyes swept across the chamber. You believe the human caused this? Nobody answered. The king continued. The Dominion did not mobilize because of coffee. Silence. They mobilized because they sensed opportunity. His voice remained calm. Measured. Controlled. The responsibility belongs to our enemy. Not the human. Several nobles lowered their gaze. Others remained unconvinced. The fractures within the court were becoming obvious. Some still trusted the king. Others trusted fear. And fear was winning ground. Meanwhile, beyond imperial space, the Drakari Dominion prepared for war. Massive shipyards worked around the clock. Assault fleets gathered around staging worlds. Commanders reviewed invasion plans. Intelligence reports floated above strategic tables. One report sat at the center of every discussion. The human beverage incident. The Dominion's high strategists studied it carefully. The king's condition? An intelligence officer answered. Unstable. The empire? Politically divided. The strategist nodded. Exactly what he wanted to hear. For decades, the Varethi Empire had been too strong to challenge directly. Now weakness had appeared. Or so they believed. The strategist enlarged a fleet projection. Thousands of warships illuminated the darkness. Begin final deployment. No one questioned the order. The invasion had already begun. Back on the citadel, anxiety spread through every corridor. Citizens watched military updates. Officials rushed between emergency meetings. Researchers continued searching for a cure. Soldiers prepared defensive positions. The entire empire seemed trapped between 2 disasters. A dying king. And a coming war. Ethan stood alone outside a broadcast chamber. The stars beyond the station seemed colder tonight. A door opened behind him. King Zalthor emerged. The ruler looked exhausted, but determined. They want to see strength, the king said quietly. Ethan nodded. The people? The empire. The king glanced toward the broadcast room. A live transmission was about to begin. Trillions of citizens would be watching. Waiting. Hoping. Fearing. The king straightened his shoulders. For a brief moment, Ethan saw the ruler everyone else saw. Strong. Confident. Unbreakable. Then Zalthor walked into the chamber. The broadcast began. Across countless worlds, citizens watched their monarch appear on screen. The king started speaking. His voice carried authority. His words calmed fears. Hope slowly returned. For a few precious minutes, the Empire remembered why it followed him. Then it happened. Mid-sentence. Without warning. The king's voice stopped. His body swayed. The entire galaxy watched in stunned silence. And before anyone could react, King Zalthor collapsed. The moment King Zalthor collapsed, the galaxy changed. Across thousands of worlds, billions of citizens watched their ruler fall. The live broadcast cut instantly. But it was already too late. Everyone had seen it. The rumors became reality. The king was dying. Inside the Imperial Citadel, chaos erupted. Medical teams rushed onto the stage. Security forces sealed entire sections of the palace. Military command centers activated emergency protocols. And somewhere beyond Imperial borders, enemy fleets continued advancing. The Empire had never felt more vulnerable. Ethan ran beside the emergency stretcher as physicians rushed the king back toward the Royal Medical Nexus. The monitors surrounding Zalthor screamed warnings. Neurological activity was collapsing. Motor function was deteriorating. The degeneration was accelerating beyond every previous projection. The king's physician looked defeated. Not frightened. Defeated. The expression terrified Ethan more than the alarms. "Tell me there's something left to try." The physician didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. 3 levels below the medical wing, researchers continued working without rest. Some had not slept in days. Human scientists remained connected through holographic communication channels from Earth. Alien researchers occupied every available workstation. Coffee samples from dozens of worlds filled containment chambers. The investigation had become a race against death. Then suddenly a voice shouted across the laboratory. "Wait." Every head turned. A human biochemist appeared on one of the holographic displays. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She looked exhausted, but excited. The dangerous kind of excited. The kind scientists experienced when they discovered something impossible. "Show us." The room immediately gathered around her display. Sarah enlarged several molecular structures. Most people didn't understand what they were seeing. Ethan certainly didn't. But he recognized one thing. The researchers were no longer arguing. They were listening. Carefully. The therapeutic effect isn't produced by the compounds individually. The display shifted. Multiple molecular models merged together. It occurs when they form a temporary molecular chain. A Varethi scientist frowned. A chain reaction. Not exactly. Sarah highlighted a section of the model. This structure. The room stared. The shape looked insignificant. Tiny. Simple. Yet every researcher suddenly became very interested. The physician stepped forward. "What is it?" Sarah hesitated, as if she still couldn't believe the answer herself. A naturally occurring molecular arrangement. The room waited. Her next sentence stunned everyone. It evolved inside coffee plants. Silence. Complete silence. An elderly alien scientist slowly sat down. "No." Sarah nodded. "Yes." The display zoomed further. "We've checked the data repeatedly. Certain coffee species accidentally developed this structure over millions of years." Another researcher stared in disbelief. "Accidentally?" Sarah gave a small laugh. "Nature doesn't care about our expectations." The room remained frozen. All this time they had assumed the answer required advanced technology. Ancient alien science. Lost medical knowledge. Some forgotten breakthrough. Instead, the solution appeared to have emerged from agriculture. From farmers. From plants. From evolution. Ethan couldn't help smiling. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic medicine might have started on a farm. The excitement lasted less than 5 minutes. Then reality returned. A Varethi researcher raised the obvious problem. "Can we produce it?" The room became quiet again. Sarah's smile faded. "Maybe." Nobody liked that answer. The physician folded his arms. "Maybe. The molecular chain is unstable." The display shifted. The structure began breaking apart. Again and again. Every simulation ended the same way. Collapse. Failure. Instability. The room's hope weakened. Sarah continued. "We believe it can be synthesized." A small spark returned. Then she added the dangerous part. "We've never done it before." The spark weakened again. Experimental. Unproven. Risky. The story of the entire crisis. The physician stared at the simulation. What are the chances? Sarah didn't answer immediately, because everyone already knew. The chances weren't good. Hours later, Ethan stood inside a quiet medical chamber. The room felt strangely peaceful, almost disconnected from the chaos consuming the Empire. King Zalthor rested on an elevated platform. His condition had worsened dramatically. The strength, the energy, the sharp focus, all gone. Only fragments remained. The king opened his eyes as Ethan approached. "You look terrible." The ruler actually laughed. A weak laugh, but genuine. "You humans possess unusual bedside manners." Ethan pulled a chair closer. For a few moments neither spoke. Both understood the situation. Neither wanted to say it aloud. Finally the king broke the silence. "The invasion?" Ethan answered honestly. "Still coming." Zalthor nodded.
No surprise.
No fear. Just acceptance. The burden of leadership never truly left him. Even now. Even here. His people remained his first concern. Ethan looked toward the medical equipment. They found something. The king's eyes sharpened slightly. Hope. Tiny. Fragile. But present. Ethan explained everything. The molecular structure. The synthesis. The experimental treatment. The risks. He didn't hide anything. When he finished, silence filled the room. The king stared at the ceiling. Thinking. Calculating. Considering. Finally he spoke. "What are my chances?" Ethan took a deep breath. The truthful answer hurt. "I don't know." The king smiled faintly. An honest answer. Ethan leaned forward. "No." The king looked at him. Ethan continued. "You trusted me over a cup of coffee." A faint smile appeared. Despite everything, the absurdity remained. The entire crisis had started with coffee. You trusted humanity when everyone else thought we poisoned you. The king listened quietly. Ethan's voice became firmer. "So trust us one more time." For several seconds, neither moved. Then Zalthor slowly nodded. The decision was made. The treatment chamber became the center of the Empire. Scientists watched remotely. Military commanders waited for updates. Citizens prayed. Researchers monitored every variable. The Sinzai's compound rested inside a transparent injector. Months of hope. Weeks of panic. Days of non-stop work. Everything had led here. The physician approached the king's platform. His hands were steady. Years of experience prevented hesitation. "Ready?" The king nodded. Ethan stood nearby. Watching. Waiting. Hoping. The injector activated. The compound entered the king's bloodstream. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the monitors exploded with activity. Neural signals surged. Heart rate increased. Energy levels spiked. Researchers shouted updates. The room filled with excitement. Maybe it was working. Maybe humanity had done the impossible. Then the alarms changed. The hopeful sounds disappeared. Warning tones replaced them. The physician's expression darkened.
No.
The monitors began flashing red. One by one. Across every display. The king's neurological readings plummeted. Heart rhythm destabilized. Life support systems activated automatically. The room froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Everyone watched the numbers. Watched the battle occurring inside one dying body. Then the final alarm sounded. A single continuous tone. Cold. Merciless. The line across the monitor flattened. King Zalthor's vital signs flatlined. The sound of the flatline seemed to consume the entire room. A single, endless tone. Cold. Final. Merciless. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The greatest scientific effort in imperial history appeared to have ended in failure. King Zalthor lay motionless on the medical platform. The ruler of thousands of worlds. The warrior who had united star systems. The monarch who had carried a dying body while protecting an empire. Gone. The chief physician stared at the monitor. His hands trembled. Not from age. From grief. Years of service. Years of loyalty. Years spent trying to save his king. And now? Nothing. Across the chamber, scientists lowered their heads. Some simply stared blankly at their screens. Others refused to look at the body. Human researchers watching remotely fell silent. Even the military officers standing guard seemed frozen. The impossible gamble had failed. Ethan couldn't accept it. He remained standing beside the platform, looking at the king, waiting, as though refusing to believe what every monitor was showing. The physician finally spoke. His voice cracked. Time of death. Then an alarm interrupted him. A different alarm. The room froze. Several heads turned toward a secondary monitor. One researcher blinked, then blinked again. No. The physician stopped speaking. What? The researcher pointed. Hand shaking. Look. The room surged toward the display. A faint signal appeared. Tiny. Weak. Barely visible. Yet undeniably present. Neural activity. The physician stared.
Impossible.
The flatline remained. Yet deep inside the king's brain, something was happening. Something none of their models predicted. Another signal appeared. Then another. Then dozens. The displays suddenly flooded with new information. Researchers rushed to their stations. Neural pathways reactivating. What? That's impossible. The alarms intensified. Not warnings. Updates. The room erupted into controlled chaos. The physician's eyes widened. Because the damaged sections of the king's brain were beginning to glow on the neural map. Not deteriorating. Recovering. The room fell silent again. Not from fear this time. From disbelief. The degeneration wasn't stopping. It was reversing. Ethan stepped closer. His heart pounded. The king's fingers moved. Just slightly. A tiny motion. Yet everyone saw it. The physician nearly dropped his scanner. Motor response restored. Another update appeared. Then another. The damaged neural pathways continued rebuilding. The synthetic compound wasn't behaving as expected. It wasn't acting like medicine. It was acting like a blueprint. Guiding repair. Restoring connections. Repairing decades of neurological damage. One alien scientist stared at the display. His voice barely above a whisper. We didn't create a treatment. Nobody answered. Because everyone was thinking the same thing. This was something more. The monitors suddenly surged. Heart activity returned. Weak at first. Then stronger. Then stronger again. The flatline disappeared. The room exploded with noise. Researchers shouted. Physicians issued rapid commands. The king's physician stood frozen. Tears forming in his eyes. He had prepared himself to lose his ruler. Prepared himself to watch the end. Now reality was rewriting itself. The heartbeat stabilized. Neurological function increased. Motor coordination returned. Every reading improved. Then exceeded normal levels. Then exceeded healthy levels. The physician stared at the numbers. His hand shook again. Only now from shock. The degeneration markers. A scientist looked up. What about them? The physician swallowed. Then checked the results a second time. Then a third. The answer never changed. They are gone. Silence. Nobody understood. The physician enlarged the scans. Every trace of the disease had vanished. Not reduced. Not suppressed. Gone. The damage remained repaired. The degeneration had disappeared completely. Years of medical theory collapsed in a single moment. One researcher sat down heavily. Another simply laughed in disbelief. A third stared at the display as though witnessing a miracle. Perhaps they were. Then King Zelthor opened his eyes. The entire chamber stopped moving. The ruler looked upward. Calm. Focused. Awake. For several seconds he simply observed the ceiling, as though processing a distant dream. Then his gaze shifted toward Ethan. Recognition appeared immediately. The king smiled. A real smile. Not strained. Not weakened. Strong. Healthy. Alive. You look terrible. Human. The room erupted. Laughter. Relief. Celebration. Months of fear shattered instantly. Ethan actually laughed despite himself. You already used that joke. Then it must be a good one. The king's voice carried strength. More strength than Ethan had ever heard from him. The physician approached cautiously. Scanning. Testing. Verifying. Every result shocked him further. Reaction speed improved. Memory improved. Neural efficiency improved. The king wasn't merely healthy. He was better than healthy. The recovery exceeded every projection, every prediction, every dream. Hours later, news spread across the empire. The king lived. The disease was gone. Humanity had saved him. Not soldiers. Not weapons. Not political power. Human curiosity. Human adaptability. Human persistence. An agricultural product from Earth had achieved what entire civilizations never discovered. For the first time in centuries, hope spread faster than fear. Yet celebration did not last long. A military officer rushed into the chamber. His expression instantly changed the atmosphere. The room quieted. The officer activated a holographic display. Red symbols appeared across the border sectors. Thousands of them. Warships. Carrier groups.
Assaut formation.
The Drakari Dominion. The enemy fleet. The officer looked directly at the king. Then at the assembled court. His voice was grim. The invasion force has crossed the border. The hologram expanded. Sector after sector turned red. The room fell silent once more. King Zalthor was saved. But the war had arrived. The rival empire's fleet had entered imperial territory. The imperial war chamber had never been so quiet. Thousands of military officers stared at the massive holographic display hanging above the command floor. Red symbols filled entire sectors of space. The Drakari Dominion invasion fleet. A force large enough to ignite a galactic war. Days earlier, the situation would have been catastrophic. The empire's ruler had been dying. The court had been divided. The military had been uncertain. The future had looked fragile. Now everything was different. King Zalthor stood at the center of the chamber. Healthy. Strong. Alive. The same officers who had prepared for the collapse of an empire now watched their ruler with renewed confidence. The king studied the invasion map. His golden eyes were calm. Focused. The eyes of a leader who no longer carried the burden of impending death. The enemy had expected weakness. Instead, they had arrived too late. Very late. A communications officer stepped forward. Your Majesty. The Drakari High Command requests formal surrender negotiations. Several admirals laughed. Others looked offended. The king simply smiled. They still believe I am dying. The officer nodded. They are operating on outdated intelligence. The king's smile widened. Then perhaps we should update them. Hours later, a galaxy-wide transmission was arranged. Military leaders from both powers connected through secure diplomatic channels. Billions watched. Citizens. Soldiers. Scientists. Politicians. Entire worlds paused to witness what many believed would be the beginning of war. The Drakari Supreme Strategist appeared on the central display. His expression carried the confidence of someone expecting victory. He looked directly at Zalthor. Then his confidence disappeared. The strategist blinked. Once. Twice. He leaned closer to his display.
Impossible.
The king was standing. Healthy. Alert. The signs of degeneration were gone. Shock spread through the enemy delegation. Zalthor spoke first. You appear surprised. No one answered immediately. The strategist finally found his voice. Our intelligence reported. My death? The king finished. Silence. The entire galaxy listened. The strategist looked genuinely unsettled. Because everything about his invasion plan had depended on one assumption. The king was dying. That assumption had just evaporated. The military advisors expected threats. They expected ultimatums. Perhaps even declarations of war. Instead, the king did something nobody anticipated. He activated a new holographic display. Medical data appeared. Research records. Scientific findings. Human and Varethi cooperation reports. The strategist frowned. What is this? The king's answer would become one of the most famous statements in galactic history. This is the reason your invasion has already failed. Confusion spread across the enemy delegation. The king continued. For centuries, our civilization searched for solutions to diseases once believed incurable. More data appeared. Neurological disorders. Genetic failures. Degenerative conditions. medical challenges affecting countless species. The strategists' confusion deepened. What does this have to do with military affairs? The king's eyes brightened. Everything. The final report appeared. The cure. The Sinzai's treatment. The restored neural pathways. The complete recovery. Gasps echoed throughout command centers across the galaxy. Scientists watching the broadcast immediately began analyzing the information. Some stood from their seats. Others stared in disbelief, because they understood the implications before anyone else. This wasn't merely a cure for one ruler. This could help entire civilizations. The king allowed the realization to spread. Then he delivered the truth. This breakthrough came from humanity. The galaxy listened. Not from military conquest. Not from advanced weapons. Not from secret technology. He paused. A faint smile appearing. It began with coffee. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then the reaction exploded. Within weeks, research teams across known space began implementing the discovery. Diseases previously considered unstoppable suddenly had hope. Medical institutions collaborated across political borders. Old rivals exchanged scientific information. Hospitals requested access to human agricultural databases. Entire sectors experienced medical breakthroughs. The impact spread further every month. What started as a misunderstanding inside a royal palace evolved into one of the greatest scientific revolutions in galactic history. Humanity became famous. But not for the reasons many had expected. Not because humans were stronger. Not because they were tougher. Not because they could survive dangerous chemicals. Those things remained impressive. Yet they weren't what changed the galaxy. What changed the galaxy was something uniquely human. The ability to approach impossible problems differently. To keep experimenting. To keep adapting. To keep asking questions everyone else overlooked. Where advanced civilizations saw a poison, humans saw breakfast. Where experts reached dead ends, humans kept searching. Where others accepted impossibility, humans refused. Months later, life aboard the Imperial Citadel had largely returned to normal. Trade flowed. Diplomacy resumed. The threat of war faded. Even the Drakari Dominion eventually withdrew its invasion fleets. No government wanted conflict while the greatest medical breakthrough in history was being shared freely across the galaxy. And at the center of it all stood one very confused logistics officer, Ethan Carter, who still couldn't believe any of this had happened. One morning he walked through a public plaza and nearly dropped his coffee. A massive statue stood at its center. Bronze. Several stories tall. His likeness. Holding a coffee mug. Ethan stared. People walked past it respectfully. Children pointed at it. Tourists photographed it. The plaque beneath read, Ethan Carter, the human who offered a cup and changed the stars. Ethan groaned. This is embarrassing. Nearby citizens laughed. The statue wasn't going anywhere. Later that same day, King Zalthor sat upon his throne. The royal court conducted routine business. Petitions. Trade agreements. Diplomatic matters. Everything appeared normal. Yet one object rested beside the throne, protected more carefully than many priceless treasures. A simple human coffee mug. The original mug. The very one that had started everything. Visitors often asked why the king kept it there. His answer never changed. It reminds me that history rarely announces itself. Sometimes the smallest moments become the most important. A conversation. A decision. A cup of coffee. As the day's final meeting ended, a royal attendant approached Ethan. The human was preparing to leave for another completely ordinary logistics assignment. Exactly the kind of work he had always done. The attendant bowed. His Majesty has sent a message. Ethan sighed. What now? The attendant handed him a small data tablet. Ethan opened it. Then laughed. The message contained only a single sentence. Breakfast tomorrow. Bring coffee. Below it appeared the royal seal. And a handwritten addition from the king himself. Every morning. Ethan shook his head and smiled. Across the galaxy, people would spend centuries studying the scientific breakthrough that saved civilizations. Historians would debate its impact. Researchers would write countless papers. Leaders would celebrate humanity's contribution. But Ethan knew the truth. The entire chain of events had started because one tired human worker wanted a cup of coffee before work. And somehow, that ordinary cup had changed the galaxy forever.